Welcome to this session on getting started with AWS for game development. This is an introductory session where we're going to be exploring how to get started with AWS for new people. This is also a session that's going to be quite good for people who have maybe played with the AWS console a little bit and some of the pieces of the services, but just looking for some tips and tricks as to how to get started. I'm Peter Chapman. I'm a specialist solutions architect for games. I've been with AWS for around about 4 years now, and I spend all of my time working with game developers, helping them to build and design games and experiences that they haven't been able to previously do without the cloud and some of the new features and tools that are becoming available. It's a ton of fun. I really enjoy doing it. Currently, I'm also playing a game called Disco Elysium, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. I'm a big adventure game nerd, so really enjoying that.
My name is Daniel Whitehead. I'm a senior solutions architect with AWS. Similar to Peter, I help customers building highly scalable applications in the cloud. And I've been, playing games since I was little. That's how I got into computing.
So we're going to take a quick look at the agenda and what we're going to run through today. So primarily, these are things that when Daniel and I started working with AWS, these are really things that we wished we knew when we first got started. We've been working with AWS for a good few years now, and so this would have saved us some serious time back then. There's going to be some lessons learned and ways to save you time as you're doing some of the activities you'll do generally with AWS. And so to do this, we're going to sort of take a bit of a journey. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an example reference architecture. As I say, this is an introductory session, so this is going to be really high level. We're not going to get into the architecture too much. It's really going to be more of a scenario. And then off the back of that, what we're going to do is explore a use case, a need to change that architecture and expand it in some way. And there's going to be reasons behind that. We're going to look at that. And then we're going to actually have a need then to research how to do things and utilize AWS to help us with our goals, our use case. And then from there, we're going to go right into the AWS console. We're going to do some demos. We're going to look at how we can employ some of these tips and tricks, save some time looking through some of those things. And then, of course, we're going to also look at the command line, which is really cool. Look at the tools there and getting that set up and started. Again, we're not going to get too in depth. It's just a beginning session, but we're really going to kind of hopefully give you the real starting point to do some of these things with AWS.
And at the high level, what we're trying to make sure is that you take some of the lessons learned that we've had about being able to be the most productive on the AWS platform from all, the things that we've learned over the years, that you don't have to go through all the trials and tribulations that Peter and I had to go through. In AWS, everything is an API, right? So we have multiple interfaces that we can go into them. So most of you are going to get started utilizing the console. So this is going to be the web console in which you're going to log in. You're going to be presented, all the list of services, and whether it's you're using EC2 or Dynamo or any other service on there, this is going to be the primary kind of landing point for anybody who's getting started on AWS. I know when I first started using AWS, I landed on here. However, one thing that we would want you to know is that all of the commands that are happening on that console are also done via can be done via the CLI or the SDK. So everything under the hood is done by an API, right? So there's going to be APIs that are going to be calling, launching a service, turning off a service, describing a service. Almost all of them across each one of those platforms are going to have analogous commands to be able to do the same things, depending on the platform that you're using that. So as you're getting more familiar with the platform, you might want to go to the CLI where you're going to be interacting with AWS from a command line interface, or you might be baking this directly into your game client or your game application directly in the code, calling new servers or calling new services.
There are a few inconsistencies, they're very few and far between, but it's not 100% parity between what you might be able to do in the console versus the CLI or SDK. So it's just worth being aware of that. It's, again, very, very minimal. Pretty much there is quite a uniformity support across them, but worth being aware of that up front, just keeping an eye out for that as you go forward.
You can see that there's going to be a lot of services, right? So I know when I first started on the platform, I think there was something around 60 some odd services. Now we're quite a bit ahead of that. But you can see that the big thing that we've tried to do here is that you can think of services, at least from the game developer's standpoint, in kind of structured places where you might want to be able to fulfill a specific workload. Right. So in this case, we might have something that we are looking at where I might want to be doing game server hosting. So I have a number of services that I can take a look at that are going to fulfill that need. Right. So depending on the service that I want to, or the use case that I'm trying to fulfill, there's going to be either purpose-built specific services to be able to help with that, or there's going to be a number of services that have the capability of actually being utilized within that specific use case. And we're going to be showing you, one of the things that we're going to be showing you in a future as part of this is how do I narrow down from I have all the services to choose from to how do I figure out which services for the use case that I am looking for can I choose from.
One of the things I think it's worth calling out in addition on this slide is that, I mean, it looks like there's a lot here, and there actually is. And what Daniel and I are going to show you is going to really help you sort of turn down the kind of noise on this, if you will, like seeing so many different services. There's an awful lot of power and capability here, but the tricks that we're going to show you is going to help you to zero in on the services that are right for you and the ones that are going to work best for your use case. We're going to start with our problem space, and this is kind of going to blend into our use case as well. So we're going to be Acme Games. We're going to be a game developer that have just a few months ago launched our first real-time multiplayer game. So we've got some experience in game development. Clearly, we've released some games before, but they weren't multiplayer real-time games. So so that was a new component for us and a new task that we had to do. And we built out this design that you see in front of you here on the screen. It was pretty typical, really. We've got our data center and we have our backend services servers. So these are going to provide things like authentication, matchmaking, and kind of general sort of back-end service functions, also like player data management. As you see behind that, we have our player database where we're storing our player data. And then we also have things like session discovery and session management. So once we've match made and we found our players and understand who they are, we're going to find a session for them to play for our multiplayer dedicated online game. And then we have our session store database for that. And then finally, of course, one of the key components is our game servers. We're sort of running our game servers to host those game sessions, of course, at need. But one of the things we struck when we launched the game, and it was a great problem to have, but it was a problem nonetheless. The game was way more successful and popular than we thought it was going to be. So we really quickly started to see capacity constraints and bottlenecks and some issues in our architecture that we really need to address quickly. So with that, our players reported several issues as a result of these constraints that we were starting to see. The first one was high latency. So what seemed to be happening was our game servers were starting to get stressed under the amount of sessions that we were running on them. Because of our capacity issues, trying to support as many players as we could, we were running a few more sessions than we probably should on a server, and that was causing some lag on the server. So that's one thing we need to resolve and address. Also, players were reporting long session wait times. So it was really taking a lot longer than we would have liked, and frankly, our players would have liked, for them to be able to get into a game session when they wanted to. And again, that was because we really just didn't have the servers to be able to, and game sessions, therefore, to be able to support our player base. And then finally, we actually had an authentication issue. Our auth server failed and caused an outage essentially across our entire game because we need to be able to authenticate to do further action in the back end. And so that really causes some significant issues. So we need to remediate these things, and we need to do it fairly quickly because we want to continue supporting our game and growing it. It's got the popularity, so we need to capitalize on this. And so we determined there's a few things that we've built around our use case to alleviate some of these issues. One, we need to address our game servers and be able to essentially migrate, well, our whole architecture really into the cloud. We've decided we want to do that because it allows us to essentially deploy throughout the globe, wherever we need to be, where our players are and where our game is most popular, we can put our server infrastructure. So we essentially want to be able to lift and shift our game servers and actually our backend servers at the moment into AWS, also our databases too. So that's an important requirement because we need to do this quickly. We don't have time to sort of re-architect everything. We just want to get everything into the cloud and operate properly. Secondly, as I mentioned, we want to be able to kind of globally deploy, but we need to be able to do that quickly. We also need to be able to manage and really essentially keep our infrastructure up to date, keep our servers up to date. We need to be able to operate our game effectively and easily while in the cloud globally across all those different regions. So we have that requirement too. And then finally, we of course need to be able to scale, and we want to make use of the cloud to elastically scale up and down, particularly our game servers as we need to, but frankly, the whole architecture, we want to make sure the whole thing can scale up and down so that if we have an issue, also we want to be able to have redundancy. If we have an issue like with our authentication server going down, we need to be able to have something in backup ready to go and take that load if we see those types of issues. So with all these things, we need to essentially migrate our existing architecture as quickly as we can into the cloud and then globally deploy it.
How would we do that, right? So, we have these specific use cases, and what we want to do is to kind of show you a flow chart around how you would be able to pick a specific service to be able to meet a specific need, right? So in this case, we're going to be looking at, we have recommendations within the AWS Game Tech landing page around looking at specific things that you're looking at. So if you're running containers, what are the services that you could look at? How do I choose between, let's say, EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, or ECS, the Elastic Container Service, or even looking at GameLift, and what are the differentiations between those, and what's the recommendation? From there, what would we need to be able to know about a service's high-level technical details to be able to figure out, does it work for what we're trying to solve for? Or is there some prescriptive guidance out there in terms of a blog or something in that nature to be able to help me make a decision? As well as, is there any kind of webinar or recorded session to be able to talk about these specific use cases? From there, we're going to take that higher level knowledge and say we have a couple of choices to be able to choose from. We're then going to be diving deeper onto the technical aspects within the documentation to see whether or not these specific services are going to meet the technical need, right? If I need to have certain ports open, are they going to be open? If I'm going to need to be able to try to pack as many things onto a single container host as possible in some configuration, do I have the ability to do so on that platform? And that's going to be documentation within the service itself. And then lastly, once I figured out which service I want to be able to look at and have satisfied the technical requirements, I'm then going to be looking out for code samples or things like that to be able to see if I can try to leverage something that would get me running faster than if I were to have to build it all from the ground up. So this is the AWS Game Tech landing page. If you want to start off by knowing at a high level around a specific use case and then the underlying services or things that you can use to be able to meet that requirement, you can start here. So what I would first start off is scrolling down, and you can see that we have a number of places to be able to click to explore deeper specific use cases around games in AWS. So if I clicked on compute, you'd be able to see that we have a number of different featured use cases to be able to take a look at and see if this meets our need. And as you can see, we don't have something talking about, we have something talking about a sessions-based multiplayer game, but it's not necessarily talking about a containerized game session. So, we've done some reading around. We decided that we're going to land upon EKS, or the Elastic Kubernetes Service, which is going to be the containerization platform that we're going to be looking at. So to be able to get an understanding of what that service is at a high level, we're going to take a look at the FAQ. I would generally recommend for any service that you don't know what's going on, or you don't know what the service is going to do, each one of the services, or a large amount of the services that we have in AWS, have this overview as well as the FAQ, which are going to answer, at a high level, what this service is trying to address. This allows me to be able to understand, is this a good fit for my use case? Or if it's not, I can move on to something else. So in this case, I read through the Elastic Kubernetes service and said, I want to be running Kubernetes. I want to be running my game sessions in a container. I want to know more. So what I would then do is I would go over and take a look at some blogs to see what are some of the reference architectures that might be utilizing this service to be able to deliver this this specific use case. In this case, I was able to find a game DevOps made easy with a CI/CD using Kubernetes as a way to be able to leverage this in a games context. So I now have some idea of what this looks like in terms of using the service. I have some reference architecture around how to do this in a CI/CD fashion. I can then start getting deeper on the specific technical requirements of this service. So as you saw previously, we went to the overview, but if you go to the getting started page, you can scroll down here to the bottom and you can see there's a little a link here that says developer guide. We can click on that. And what's going to come up is going to be all the technical information that I need to be able to make sure that not only at a high level does this make sense, but at a lower level does this make sense, right? Is it going to allow me to have open ports that I need to have open for my game client that I have configured? Is it going to allow me to have the container strategy that I want to be able to have for my use case to make sure that my customers are not being impacted? So I would be reading through all the documentation here about how I could build on top of the service to be able to create a game service so that I can expose it to my customers so they can enjoy my game. After I've made sure that they have the the technical implementation that I need, one thing that I might also want to take a look at is moving over to let's see here, moving over to GitHub to be able to take a look at a code sample about what this might look like in a real world example. I might not have to build everything from scratch. There might be some things that are sitting in the AWS samples or AWS labs area that I can take a look at and I can use as kind of a baseline to be able to get something up and working quicker rather than having to write it all from scratch. And this is generally the same flow that we'd be going through that was that we had talked about before, is looking at a higher level and then scoping in until we get to a point where we're looking at the specific use case and code to be able to institute that specific use case.
I think the real takeaway tip from working with the documentation, as we talked about, that kind of steps, those 4 steps of digging in and sort of starting high level and getting deeper as you go forward, discounting pieces as you go along. Really, the FAQs, I think, is the kind of really most useful tip. It can really help you to get down, understand what the service does at its high level scope very quickly, and then either continue on with it because you think it's definitely going to be useful for your use case, or just narrow down, like discount it as quickly as possible. So starting with that game tech landing page, identifying some of the services that fit that high level architecture. We've got some good examples of various different games use cases on there. And then as Daniel said, really working deeper down into the docs. But the FAQ is definitely something I would definitely say look into further. So now we've kind of done a bit of a look through the documentation and we've explored the various different options. Back at Acme Games, we are now we've got an idea of what we want our reference architecture to be, what we're going to aim to do in the AWS cloud to migrate and essentially lift and shift as much as we can into AWS. In this case, we should be able to do everything. So what we've decided is that, and as Daniel said, we're going to utilize EKS to host essentially all of our servers, our backend servers for our services, our session discovery and management servers, and of course our game servers. We're going to put them all in containers in EKS. We feel that's going to give us the most flexibility, and after doing our research, that's what we really wanted to do. And our backend databases as well, we're actually going to put into Aurora. We're going to just put them over into the same database, but in Aurora as we had in on-prem. So whichever kind of database type you had, we're going to put that in Aurora. So we're going to host it there. So what this is going to give us is going to give us a deployable architecture that's we can put into any region that AWS supports. It's going to be able to auto scale because we're going to utilize both Aurora and also EKS to do that for us. And of course, we can easily improve and make more resilient as we go forward in the future as well. Some of these service structures that we have, and again, going with containers is going to really be able to make resilience easier. We're going to be able to fail over to other instances of the service should one fail, like our auth issue. And we're going to just we're going to kind of really improve those things by doing this. Again, this is a super high level look at the architecture, but this is going to give us what we want. So now we're going to take a look through the AWS console. We're going to get hands-on with it and take you through some of the tips and tricks to how to use the console and how to navigate it quickly and easily. And to do that, you're going to actually need an AWS account set up. So take a look at this this link here. Jump over to this link to get signed up. This will take you through the steps of getting an account if you don't already have one. This is also going to be in the resource area of the tool that you're using for this event. So please grab it there and do navigate to that link. And we're going to be looking at various different elements of the AWS console today. We're going to look at navigation, how to do search, how to tag your resources. This one's a really cool one. How to tag things and keep track of the resources. Really useful as your infrastructure expands. And of course, region control. This is one of those ones that I'm sure Daniel and I have both cursed over the years. We wonder where our stuff's gone and find we're in the wrong place. We're going to look at that. We're also going to look at security. We're going to create our own entry point for our account. We're definitely going to turn on MFA, multi-factor authentication, and disable our root user. And we're also going to create an IAM user, Identity and Access Manager user. And we're going to look at support. We're going to create a ticket, and we're going to see about languages and changing languages and supported languages in the console. And then just finally, any other kind of general tips and tricks that we like the idea of that we think it'd be worth you knowing, billing alerts, service quotas, and just diagnosis, things like that. Also things like bookmarks and service pinning too. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can dig in and find the service via our search tool. So we've just been looking at EKS. So let's go and find EKS in the console. We have this find services search bar here, which is a rich search. So we can just type in EKS, or we can type in containers, and this will take us to the services that are relevant to us. So Daniel's putting containers in here, and you can see Elastic Kubernetes Service EKS is now appearing for us. So that's awesome. If we click on that, we're going to be able to go into that service and start taking a look. So that rich search is really handy. If we were searching for databases, we would see all the databases, services, and so on. Of course, it makes total sense. Also, the console here quite helpfully tells us if we're in a region that we're not in that's supporting that service, it will tell us that, and we have to switch to one that obviously does. So we're going to be doing our work in Oregon today, I believe. So we can see that. That's actually, whilst we look at that, that's actually another really useful tip. We touched on it a second ago. Regions. I can't tell you the amount of times when I was first starting with AWS, I'm sure Daniel will tell you the same thing, where I was building out my infrastructure, things were going great. I'd finished my work for the day. I would go away, go home for the evening, come back the next day, and for one reason or another, all of my infrastructure has just disappeared. I'm like, where has everything gone? Quite often that is because the region that you're now in, for some reason that you've switched over, that infrastructure isn't there in that particular region. It looks like it's disappeared. So if you do find that you've got some service somewhere or something that's running an EKS cluster, do check your region. Check it as often as you can. And if you see something that looks odd, isn't there that should be, first thing, check the region, probably the region. So now we're on the AWS console. We see ourselves at the console home screen. And just another thing to kind of call out, for the purposes of this demo, we've actually got a little bit of infrastructure running that kind of emulates our on-premise architecture that we looked at earlier. So if we quickly go over to the Elastic container, the Elastic to EC2, the Elastic Compute Service, and take a look there. We can see that we've got several running instances at the moment. That's currently being highlighted here as well. We can see various other things, but we're just going to focus on the instances at the moment. So if we click into the running instances, we can see several instances that are for our Acme Games server infrastructure. We have our backend services, servers, we have our game servers, and of course we have our session-based management system. They're all running in here. Again, in the real world, they would have been running in our on-prem architecture. We also have some DynamoDB databases that you'll see come up later on as we look at a few other tools. But they're in there at the moment just to kind of represent our on-prem architecture. And we're going to show you some tips and tricks around these particular tools. But what we did when we were exploring our way of moving into the cloud was we looked at Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS. So we're going to jump back to the console home, and we're going to find the best way, the quickest way for us to navigate to that via search. So in this screen here, we can see we have this Find Services toolbar. And what this is a really cool rich search function. It allows us to search for our services in ways that are natural to us. So we can either search for Elastic Kubernetes Service as we are here and find the service directly if we know the name, or we could search for containers as well, and that would bring up all of the services that run containers. We can even search for compute, and that would also bring it up as well. So all of those different types of searches will do the job for us and bring us closer to what we're looking for. So if we have now once we've actually searched that and found it, we can dive into that service and we can take a look through the console and sort of start to get familiar with it. So very quickly, we'll just have a quick look at that. You can see here there's some how it works. Some of this is similar to the documentation that you'd have seen from the investigation we did, but it really does give us a good jumping off point as to how to kind of get to grips with the service, understand it better, and then really kind of start to explore it, play around, and of course create, in this case, our first cluster as well. We're going to, this makes it really easy to kind of do that and get started with. So since we've kind of got into EKS, there's a few other things we can do. We can actually utilize our search drop-down to get to services too. So there's that in the top left-hand corner, there's a services drop-down. If we click that, it will bring up all of the services that are in AWS, and of course that rich search bar as well. This is all just as a drop-down as to wherever we are, wherever we're navigated in the console, we can always use this. But we can essentially click directly onto the service. They're all grouped into various different types. Analytics services, as you can see there, also database services, basically various areas of relevance for us. We can actually also list by alphabetical order if we prefer. So if we know the name of it, we don't really want to type the search in, we can just get to it that way by alphabetical order as well. Maybe we just prefer to scan the list of services that way too. So we're able to do that. On the left-hand side of this drop-down, you can see there's a history as well. So the history kind of tells us what we've been navigating to most recently in the console. So you see EKS is at the top, the console home, and then EC2, when we went and looked at our example infrastructure, that's all listed out for us. And this is another tip. This is something I use quite a lot when I'm working with the AWS console. I tend to work with a couple of different accounts. And when I'm doing that, it's actually quite characteristic of what I'm doing on that particular account, what my history is. And for one, it's a nice little sort of attachment point. I can look at that history and go, oh, this is the account that I'm doing X in. There are other ways, you can name the accounts and you can kind of have like other ways of spotting that. So it's definitely not the only way, but it's just one way that I instantly kind of happen to do it as I work with the console, just a kind of personal thing. But also I can very easily get to those services that I've been frequently working with on that particular account. So it's just really useful. It's a quick way of getting back to those services. And there's an additional way you can do this too, and you can actually use something called service pinning. So in that top navigation field, there's a little pin icon, and this allows you to select those services that you use most in the account and pin them to the top bar alongside services resource groups and go from there. So again, if we plan to work a lot with a container service, Elastic Kubernetes service, we can do that right there and kind of keep it there ready for various different tasks that we want to do. And again, we're going to have like the EC2 here as well to do that. So we can also set whether we want the whole name to show and the icon of the service. And we can also just set the name and I believe just the icon too. So if we prefer, be able to squeeze more into our top bar there by using those approaches. So that's really cool. So yeah, once we've done that, we've kind of able to get around the console pretty easily, find those services that we want to play with. We're now probably going to have some resources built out. You know, we're starting to play with EKS, explore maybe POC now because we've done the documentation, understood we want to use this service, or at least dig into it on a practical level. So now we're going to have some resources in our account. Well, one way we can keep track of the resources that we're building out is we can use resource groups. Now, this actually comes into play or touches on another topic that's really important in getting around the console and managing what you're doing, and that's tagging. You'll see here when we're creating this resource group, it asks us if we want it to be, identifying that group based on tags. Well, how are these two things working? Well, the resource group itself is a way that we can essentially tell our AWS account to identify certain resources in our account based on a criteria, and then we can constantly go back to that and see dynamically what's in that group. And one important way and a very common way of doing this is using tagging. So tagging allows us to put attributes against infrastructure pieces of our services, infrastructure and services in AWS. So if we have a cluster in EKS, we can tag that cluster. In our case, with our example architecture, we've actually already deployed all of the virtual private cloud, the network infrastructure for our servers and our databases into our account, and we've tagged it with specific tags that we can now search for. So we can actually group these resources together based on that tag, and then from there we can just constantly go back to it. If we add things to that particular set of resources via that tag, they'll be added there, and if we remove them, of course, they'll no longer be there. So this is a really powerful tool that we can use to group our resources together, should we want to.
So in addition to that, one of the things that is really powerful about tags as well is, and when we get over to the billing side of things, is they can be used to be able to actually view the holistic cost of a specific infrastructure, right? So as game developers, we may have different services that we want to be able to group together to figure out how much is it costing us, or how, what is our user per service that ratio that we're getting. This is going to be something that you would also want to take it as kind of a holistic approach towards your tagging strategy as well, right? So from a group level of these are the resources that we need to group together, but also at an aggregate level of I need to see what the cost of all these things are.
So now we've taken a look at some tips and tricks around the console, searching, and just navigating in general. We're going to take a look at security. And the first and most important tip we have around security in your AWS account is related to the root user. The root user is the most powerful user in your AWS account. Every account has one. And because it's so powerful, the advice that we have is essentially not to use it at all. Take that root user, assign an MFA, a multi-factor authentication token to it, ideally a physical one, and lock that MFA token away. If you can't get access to a physical one, use a virtual one, but ultimately, enable an MFA token on that account and don't use it at all. What we recommend you do is use an IAM user, create a new user in your identity and access management system for the activities you need to do, and give that the right level of permissions. So we're going to take a look at that now, and we're also going to enable MFA on that user too. So we're going to go to users and add user. We're going to give the user an appropriate name. This could be for us, or it could be we're creating this for somebody else. So we're going to have a new user. We're going to enable console access and programmatic access. We can do one or the other if we want. And we're going to auto-generate our password and enforce that it's created, it's changed on first logon. So then we're going to move to permissions, the next section. And this is where we define what we want our user to be able to do. And we do that using policies, which define the scope of the permissions that the user has. And we're just going to allow this user to have read-only access to the S3, the simple storage service in our account. So we've enabled that now, and then we're going to move on to setting up some tags. As we mentioned, tagging is super important, and users are no exception, a valuable resource. So do make sure you tag your users appropriately. In this case, we're going to say that this user is related to this particular game. And we're going to look at the settings we've set up. We're going to review those. Everything looks good. We've got our policies there, and we've got the settings that we set. So we're going to move forward and create this user now. And now we have our user. We'll be given some security key, a security key and a secret. This can be given to the user we recommend that they are rotated frequently and carefully managed. If they end up getting leaked, then obviously the permissions that this user has will have, other systems can have access to your account that way. So do rotate them and don't have them if you don't need them. So now we've created that user, we're going to enable a multi-factor authentication device on this particular user. So we go back into the user, select Security Credentials tab, and then from there we see assigned MFA device next to that particular, under that area. If we click Manage, we can then set a virtual device in this case. We're not going to be able to get all the way through this process because we don't have our virtual device on the stream here. But you can see what you can do then is on your virtual MFA device, you can set up a new pairing and scan either the QR code that can be shared here on this screen, or type in two MFA codes from the virtual device, which will allow them to sync and assign the MFA device to that particular account. Once you've done that, you need to use that MFA for signing in every time into the account, which is great because if your password was somehow compromised, the person trying to access your account still needs an MFA device as well. So that's a really important way of securing your system. So we're just going to talk about a couple of more quick things around security. One is users and roles. So we've just taken a look at a user, and a user represents either a person or either directly in the console or programmatically accessing our system using some of those permissions we defined. But roles are also a useful security mechanism. They differ from users in that they can actually be used entirely by other entities in your account. So essentially you can define that, let's say an EC2 instance, an elastic compute instance, actually gets access to your account in a particular way using a role. So it can do what's called assume the role and get the permissions that's assigned to that role for the length of the time that it has access. And there's you can time period access to roles as well. So roles are really more of a kind of a programmatic way of accessing resources in your account. You can also share roles with other accounts as well. Both of them use those baseline permissions policies that you set up, which you can create your own, and you can create your own roles, of course, as well. But essentially, roles, and users are more of a physical thing, like more of a person, and roles are more of a kind of programmatic access as well.
And just one more thing to add to that. So for a user as well as a role, they are going to be both using the access key and the secret keys, right? So if I have, let's say, an EC2 that is spun up, there's going to be an access key and a secret key in the metadata that's going to be using those things to call to make other AWS services. Same thing with if a user was doing that from the CLI. So we want to say it's the same mechanism that you're using to be able to either do things on AWS. It's just how they are applied to different constructs within IAM.
Absolutely, yeah. So the final thing we're going to talk about just briefly is entry points to your AWS account. So you see here at the top we have our entry point. Actually, we already have a custom one defined. We're going to remove that. As standard, you'll see your account number and then a further link to sign on. You can see that's quite complicated. You can't remember that very easy. It's a complex number. So you can actually customize this and make it something your own. So it's just as simple as hitting that customize button and typing in your own useful name. In our case, we're going to do Acme Games and assigning that to the link. And then we can use that link to sign in. So it's a really handy way of just getting quicker and easier access to signing into your AWS account. Well worth setting up. So those are a few of the security tips. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
Go ahead. So from here, we're going to then jump into support, and specifically, how can we utilize support to be able to either help us increase a limit, or understand a limit that we have on a service that we are currently using. And how do we interact with support to be able to either get an answer about how something is functioning in a way that we were not expecting, or to be able to get some questions answered on behalf. So I'm going to jump over to the support. You can see right here, if we click Support Center, it's going to pop open, and it's going to bring us to the Support Center. this is going to be the place in which all of the cases that we've created for this account are going to be housed. And you can see here, there's going to be links to other places such as knowledge centers, AWS documentation. These are going to be places that I can look at to be able to see if I can answer my question. If I can't answer my question, I can then go into and create a case. But before I do that, I want to go through and look at, you can see that you have your support plan here. So there's 3 different levels of support. One is going to be basic, and that comes standard with any AWS account. The next one is going to be developer, and that's going to allow you to be able to have a little bit more interaction with support, and you can see that there's some SLAs that are put on top of that. And if you click the support button, you can see that we have this handy little graph that's going to tell you all the things that you get. We generally recommend for any customer that's running any production workload in an AWS account, we recommend business support, primarily because you have the ability to call in and interact directly with a person via phone or via web chat. So now that we've done that, we're going to take a look at creating a case. So to create a case, we would click create a case. And in this instance, you can see that because we only have a basic support plan, we don't have access to the technical support. However, we do have access to create a case in account billing, as well as the service limit increases. So as we in Acme Games were using EKS earlier, we ran into a service limit that we needed to be able to increase. So we can actually go over and take a look at the service quotas for the service. So in this case, you can see that there are a number of default quotas on this particular service. These can be raised, and these are generally, these are easily raised if you write a support ticket asking to be able to increase this. With a business justification for this. So in this case, we are going to be looking at increasing the number of the control plane security groups per cluster, as we needed to be able to have more. We have a very complex setup, but looking at this, you can see kind of where the things that we need to be able to understand in terms of running this service, and what we need to do to be able to look around corners to make sure that we're not going to run into something if we're running this in prod. So moving back, we can go click service limit increase. We can go down to, let's go to EKS, and you can see this is the same rich text search. We're going to have a region that we're going to be looking at, and then we're going to be looking at the particular one. So I know I had security groups, but in this case, I'm just going to click a number of node clusters, and I'm going to put this into 150, or let's say actually 5, because at Acme Games, we've decided that we want to have a node cluster per game that we're going to be running. So this is going to be something that we would then write the reason why we're asking this, and that we've segmented these clusters away from each other so that we have a standalone cluster per game, so we can do chargebacks and things easily for our game. So once we have that, we would then put a use case in particular there, and then we would click submit, and then we would wait for support to reach back out to us. The next thing that we're going to be jumping into is going to be going into billing. So I'm going to jump over here into billing. To be able to reach billing, you can click right here where your username is, scroll down to My Billing Dashboard. It's going to come up with this handy little dashboard showing what the amount of services that we are running to date, as well as a projected spend per month on those services. So you can see here in April, we have a forecasted $124 for all of our services running. And there's a breakdown over here to the side telling us where what percentage of billing is going to what service. So if we were had something that we wanted to investigate, we could take a look at this, and we could dive deeper into figuring out what's happening, and then what could we do to be able to adjust for that. One of the things that we also want to leave you with is that we have in AWS, we have the ability to create a budget to be able to make it so that I can get an alert whether or not we are going to be hitting our monthly budget. So we don't necessarily recommend you putting an alert for 100% on your budget, as it doesn't give you any wiggle room in terms of being able to react to that alert. So we generally recommend customers go at 50%, 70%, and 90%, and make sure that you're hitting those marks as you're heading through the month to be able to hit your monthly budget. So in this case, we're going to be walking through setting up a budget in real time. So I'm going to go here, and you can see we have 4 different kinds of budgets. With this, we can take a look at usage, we can take a look at reservations, we can take a look at savings plans. We encourage you to do that, but we're going to be looking at strictly a cost budget today. So I'm going to click on cost budget, and here you're going to see I'm going to be able to define my budget details. So in this case, I'm going to say this is going to be Acme Games 1. And this is going to be a budget. I have the for a monthly budget. I can do this either annually or quarterly, depending on the time frame that I'm looking at. And this is going to be something that I would like to have be in a reoccurring fashion, or I can have it be a one-time. Say we have a marketing program that we're promoting our game, and we know that only for the next 2 months we're going to see an uptick from that. I can set a budget that's going to have an expiring date. However, today we're going to be looking at a reoccurring budget, and in this case, we're going to have a fixed budget looking at every month. We're going to have, let's say, about $800. That's our monthly budget for our entire game's backend. This is also going to tell us what our last month's budget was, so that we can then understand where we are in terms of that. You know, we have something that's in this case we have about $40. However, you know, we're expecting a large increase. So I also have the ability to track this by month. So if there is a seasonal component in terms of the game, or if you have something that's going to be releasing shortly, you have the ability to track this based upon that as well. So if I'm going to have a game that's going to be releasing in May, I can give it a significant amount more budget and have that kind of trail off depending on you know, how I'm expecting my users to be able to use that game. So, and from there, I can move over to alerts, and you can see I have my monthly budget set here. I can also set this on forecasted or actual costs. In this case, I want to do actual costs, and I want to be able to have it happen at 50%. 50%. So again, we would recommend that you have a budget at 50%, 80%, and 90%, and make sure that that tracks over the course of the month to the dates that you're expecting. And then you would add a contact email here, or I could also click this to be able to send to an SNS notification, where if I had either a Lambda function or if I had something else that was listening to that SNS topic to do something reactive, it would be able to create a system to be able to have a reactive kind of setup to be able to do something on that environment if I wanted it to. And then from there, all I would then do is click confirm budget. And I'm just going to I'm going to say Daniel at Acme Games here. And then that should be, let me remove that. And you can see I can click confirm budget. And then all I would have to do is click create. And then my budget would be created.
So now we've taken a quick look through some tips and tricks of getting started throughout. These are useful, you know, in our use case, because we've been looking at how to migrate into AWS and get our infrastructure into our account. Some of those things we looked at in support, for example, and billing, we can really use to make sure that we've got enough infrastructure ready for when we go live. But also if we're running larger POCs or even load testing, you know, kind of testing on wider levels, we can look at some of those service quotas as well. So that's really useful. One other quick thing to mention is so important that we really wanted to kind of expressly mention it separately here, and that's tagging. So this is the final point. Do take a look at this link. It will be in the resource area of your tool to click on. Do take a look at tagging. It's a really deep area. It's really important to kind of get a good view of the best practices and tips and tricks around tagging, you know, more so than we can share today. So please do take a look at that and review that as much as you can.
So now we're going to be jumping into the command line interface. So generally customers start on the AWS console, but as you get to be more familiar with the AWS platform, you start moving into more programmatic access into of the platform. So I'm a big fan of the CLI. I do most of my work from the command line interface, but it allows you to be able to have more flexible interactions with endpoints. You can set up specific custom tooling, right? So I can actually string together specific things if I'm looking to filter out for a specific tag, or if I'm trying to do a particular action on a specific service. I can create those tools within a bash script, and have that be something that I can run directly from my command line interface. And again, those are fully customizable by you, and it makes it so that you don't necessarily have to repeat yourself if you have a repeated process of standing up an entire environment, being able to modify an environment. You can create custom tools for your team and fan those out with them in an easy fashion. So we're going to be taking a look at this as a way to be able to get to more out of the platform than just utilizing the console. So the first thing that we need to do is we want to be able to install the CLI. So you can see we have a page that's dedicated specifically to installing this, and depending on the platform that you're looking at, we have specific instructions, right? So with this, we're going to be, each one of these is going to have a different way of pulling this down and installing it. This is generally a pretty standard process. However, if you're running into some problems with, let's say on the Mac or Linux or Windows side with the autocompleter, and you're running into, trying to figure out what's happening on there, I would say refer back to our documentation, as there's a lot of nice quality of life things that are baked into the CLI to be able to utilize. So such as bash auto, or in terms of Mac and Linux, there's bash autocomplete, which allows you to be able to, hit tab and it'll propagate the rest of either the service or something that you're looking for. So once we have that installed on our machine, we're going to be looking at loading credentials. So to be able to do this, we're going to need to be able to have our access keys and our secret key, as you saw that we created from the previous IAM user. We're then going to be able to need to have a region in which we're going to be operating, as well as a default output format. So in this case, you can see I ran the AWS configure, which this allows me to set up my CLI to be able to be utilizing my my access keys to be able to make calls into AWS. And we'll show you what that looks like in a second. But if I were to put my access key and secret key in here, what's going to happen is there's going to be a file that's created that's going to have the access key and secret key loaded on there. And in this case, you can see I have two profiles that are set up. That one is going to be a default as well as prod. So depending on the calls that I want to make from the CLI, I could create a flag that says I want to use either default or I want to use prod. I wouldn't have to necessarily use a flag to say default, as that would be the catch-all. However, if I had particular calls that I wanted to make using the prod, I could use that as a flag to make calls with that specific key. So moving forward, the output formats are going to be dependent on what you're expecting back from the calls that you're making. So most of the time, I've utilized JSON in terms of making it easy to be able to parse out programmatic calls back and forth. However, you have two other options for the responses in terms of text as tables. And again, this is just going to be dependent on how you want to be able to interact with the feedback that's coming back from the CLI. The next function that we're going to be looking at is going to be alias functions. So in this example, on Mac and Linux, we have the ability to have alias functions that I can actually, under the AWS CLI, I can, instead of doing an STS get caller identity, which is going to be a particular CLI command, I could map that directly to a different thing that it might be custom. So in this case, this might be a who am I, but it's going to be calling the STS get caller identity, and I'm not going to have to type all of that out. I could also create functions underneath this to be able to string together multiple things and using bash inputs and outputs to create a custom call for a particular thing that I wanted to be able to utilize.
Yeah, this can be a real time saver. Used wisely. You can create yourself a really nice succinct set of commands that really save a lot of typing out as you go forward.
And the big thing here is that, again, we want to have it so that you have custom tooling being able to reduce human error, right? So the less things that you have to do by hand and that you can do by a simple call that's going to do, a number of complex things. It's in a iterative fashion. It makes it so that there's going to be less things that are prone to having a typo or something that's going to cause it to break. On top of that, we have a GitHub repository that's going to have a number of these already pre-baked in there. So we have this in, I added a screenshot here of what this looks like. You can take a look at the AWS Labs, AWS CLI aliases, and inside of this is going to have a number of things, both from the very simple, which you saw earlier as the who am I, all the way to being able to, authorize your particular IP for a security group, so that you don't have to go into the console and change that every single time if you're moving around a lot in terms of where you're doing your game development. The next thing that we want to jump into is going to be the CLI documentation. So this is going to be the place that you're going to be looking at the commands that the CLI has, so that you can understand the flags as well as the functions that are happening for the commands that you're running. So each the CLI as a whole is all encompassing in this particular documentation. So it's going to start at the high level, and then it's going to go by service, and under each one of those services, it's going to have all the calls that you can make on that particular service and all the flags associated with that and what's required and what's optional. So it's going to be something that if you're ever wondering what's happening, or if you're trying to figure out how to do a particular function on the platform, you can look to this as a way to be able to understand what you need to do and how you need to do it. And one quick thing that I wish I had known when I started is that I came across the AWS Shell, which is going to be a Python program that allows you to actually have a way to be able to have an interactive environment that's going to pre-populate a number of choices so that you can choose from them as necessary, right? So in this case, if I were typing, let's say S3, and you can see here in the picture that it's actually, as I am typing, it's actually limiting the things that I have access to. So I might not necessarily know what I'm looking for. However, I kind of know that I'm looking for a describe function under S3, and I want to see what I have options to be able to describe. I'd be able to actually utilize the AWS Shell to be able to pull down all those options and understand all the flags in a way that I don't actually have to go look at the documentation. It's just presented to me in front of me in a programmatic way. With the AWS Shell, if I'm looking at my command line, I have the ability to type in AWS-Shell. And then what's going to pop up, it's going to put me into a top-level AWS portion of the CLI. So if I were to be able to look at a number of services, I could click E, and then all of the things that have an E that are in the name are in there. So in this case, let's say I wanted to look at EC2. I could drop down, click that. That's going to be the namespace. And then if I wanted to look for particular things in the EC2 service about how I wanted to be able to create this function, I could just list through all of the calls that I can make using the CLI. So this is a way, if you don't have a lot of experience using the CLI, making it so that you don't necessarily know the calls that you can make, or you're going to be on the CLI documentation quite a bit. This might be an easy way to get started utilizing the AWS Shell, which allows me to actually figure out what I have at my fingertips to be able to call, as well as the flags for that service. So in this case, I'm going to look at, let's say, I'm going to look at the gateway, and then I might have some flags that I want to be able to have on here. I have the ability to change the colors. I have a number of flags that I can put in here to be able to make it so that I can interact directly with that and create the CLI call that I want to make, again, with having that kind of iterative feedback directly from a program that is made to be able to help me understand what my options are.
So that was a quick look at the CLI and some best practices there for you. And that really wraps up the kind of general tips and tricks and starting points that we were keen to share with you in the session. And as you know, we talked through a very, very high level example of migration, but there are other use cases you could apply these principles to. In fact, really any use case that you have with working with AWS in general. But here's some examples, authentication, leaderboards, analytics. This is not by any means an exhaustive list. There is certainly more that you could apply them to here. We do have some good starting points for these in our documentation as well for some of these areas. And please do feel free to reach out to your account teams, to us, for any that you would like to discuss. We'd be very, very happy to help you. And so, we really hope you enjoyed the session. If you do get a chance, please do explore other sessions. And if you have any additional tech questions, please do stop by the Ask the Expert section to speak with the AWS tech experts. We'll be hanging around on there as well to help answer any of your questions. Please do check out the Resource Center. We're going to share some additional links around security and some of the things we talked about, tagging as well, things like that. And with that, thank you very much.